What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Overwatch 2 video, and in this video we're breaking down one tip for every single hero. Whether you're trying to find your perfect main or become the ultimate flex god, this is the perfect video for you, so we're gonna get right in. But if you enjoy the content, please smash that like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and share it with a buddy so they can get good. Now, the first character on our list, in alphabetical order, is none other than Ana. Now, Ana's a very difficult character to master, but let me give you some insight from a former, I bet very washed, Grandmaster Ana main. So, Ana actually has two different types of fire, the zoom in and the non-zoomed in fire, which fires fundamentally different. Zoomed in will be hit scan, meaning it will register on your crosshair, and when you're not zoomed in, it will be a projectile, which means the bullet has a travel time. Now, the hit scan is going to be easier to heal because all you need to do is get your ally inside this triangle and you will heal them. This is why you often see good Ana players quick scope their teammates close range when they're trying to heal them. Also keep in mind that when you're zoomed in, it has a trace around, meaning that enemies can see where the bullets are coming from. So if you're trying to heal an ally and you're hidden, if you fire with the non-zoomed in projectile fire, you will not give away your position to be easily dove. Next up, we have Ashe, and as a simple tip for Ashe, if you throw the dynamite right in front of you and hold the primary fire, you will automatically shoot the dynamite and it will line up perfectly. You don't have to zoom in, and you will never ever miss the dynamite, so you can get very consistent dynamites at that mid-range, and it's going to be a very reliable form of damage that you don't have to skill shot every single time. Next up, we have Baptiste, and the best tip I can give to you about Baptiste is to sandbag your immortality as long as possible. One of the biggest mistakes that Baptiste players will make is throw their immortality too early, and it doesn't bait out enough utility or force enemies out of position enough to get good value out of saving your ally. Now, of course, you don't want to use it too late, otherwise you're dead or your teammates are dead, but it is important to find that middle ground, and of course, hiding your immortality around natural cover, around a corner, make it a lot harder for enemies to shoot it and for you to get no immort value. Next on the list, we have Bastion, and it's really important that you understand that Bastion is not the old Bastion. You do not play this character like a bunker character. Not only do you not have the tanks to support it, but riding on the cart as Bastion, he doesn't do nearly as much damage as he did before, but you have an added amount of mobility, capable of using your grenade to do bounce jumps, and you have the flexibility of just using your standing fire that does a lot of damage. So don't treat him like old Bastion. Next up, we have Brig, and one of the biggest misconceptions about Brig is that she's supposed to frontline. And while there are some examples where she can go up and bash in and try to help close out a fight that you have an advantage in, for the most part, she wants to play with her team and simply have a high connection with her flail, so she keeps on triggering her Inspire, healing her team. Really great Brigs will have a very high percentage of Inspire uptime, so that's really what you're going for with connections with that long distance flail. And then as a secondary role, Brig is going to make sure to punish divers and get divers off of her allies, staying with them, enabling them, and protecting them, whether that's a DPS or a support. Next up, we have none other than the controversial cowboy himself, Cassidy. Now, a lot of players aren't quite used to the lack of a stun and the addition of a magnetic grenade. However, there's some key breakpoints that you need to realize, and when you do, you're going to get a lot of kills on Cassidy. Now, Cassidy's primary fire is going to do 70 damage as long as you're within 20 meters or less, and the magnetic grenade is going to do 1 damage on the stick, 65 explosive damage, and 65 extra damage if the target is stuck. This means that if you're within 20 meters and you shoot someone in the body and hit them with your magnetic grenade, you will kill all the 200 HP heroes, assuming they have no armor, which is the majority of them. And that is a really strong, consistent combo that only takes a body shot plus a stuck grenade that literally magnetizes on for you. And you can follow that up with a roll away trying to live as your opponent dies when the grenade explodes. Now, with other characters that do have armor, it's often better to melee them first. So if there's another Cassidy, you could start it off with a melee, a body shot, and then a magnetic grenade, so you do guarantee that kill, or 2 body shots could work as well. Next up, we do gotta talk about D.Va, and the biggest mistake that D.Va players make is they just waste their defense matrix way too much. And it's important that you maintain a certain amount of defense matrix for key ability cooldowns in situations that do come up, like saving a teammate from a diving tracer or the enemy Roadhog hook. The trick in order to save defense matrix is make sure that you're playing around natural cover on the map, able to quickly dip around cover so that you're not just face tanking damage, and utilize the high ground whenever possible, so it's a lot harder for enemies to actually chase you down and deal substantial amounts of damage to you. Next up, we got to talk about Doomfist. And the most important thing that you need to be doing on Doomfist is cycling your cooldowns. One of the biggest mistakes that Doomfist players make if they die at all is by using every single cooldown and flying in there with no way to properly get out. You should be sandbagging a certain amount of cooldowns so that you can disengage after you make that initial space creation. As you start to master this character, you'll realize when you can go in and use more abilities just as your other abilities get off of cooldown. And then eventually, after you see a huge opportunity, like the enemy team is just dying because your team got a pick and you're diving in and your team's gonna follow up, or you have your ultimate, you can actually engage much more aggressively because it's way less likely for you to die, and even if you do, your team will clean up. The next character that we got to talk about is Echo, and one of the best tips that I can give you about Echo with her ultimate is just to copy tanks. I mean, you can find some situations to copy DPS and supports, but tanks are so much guaranteed value that I think it would be pretty silly not to copy a tank with that ultimate. They're super powerful and they have the majority of all the CC in the game, and on top of that, their ultimates are team fight winning. Now, the other tip I wanted to give you about Echo is position differently depending on the DPS and threats that you're going up against. An Echo can fly pretty high up in the air and spam from a distance if she's up against characters like Tracer or Genji, but if the enemy has characters like Ashe or Widow, you would want to play far lower to the ground around natural cover, kind of like a hovering Genji, for instance. So this could be a reason why you're getting a lot of value with Echo in one game while getting completely shut down in another. The next character that we got to talk about is Genji, and I will be making an entire Genji guide breaking down exactly what you should be doing play by play so that you have a huge amount of impact on Genji. But for now, I will say that the most important thing that you should be practicing on Genji is the 180. It's very important that you're consistent with 180s and you can do them on a fly. And I know for you controller players, it's going to be a little bit difficult. That's why a lot of controller players have a very high sensitivity, and there's some other special settings that you enable on controller that I will get into. But for mouse and keyboard players, it's all about finding the proper sensitivity that enables being able to 180 very easily, and then practice and muscle memory. But we'll talk more about that in the guide, so smash that like and subscribe so you don't miss out. Next character that we got to talk about is Hanzo, and one of the biggest mistakes that Hanzo players make is that they are not patient enough with your duels. Realize that Hanzo can win an entire matchup with one single headshot against every single squishy in the game, but it's very important that you look for that opportunity. Many times, Hanzo is going to be under a lot of duress and a lot of pressure before he gets that key moment to hit that shot. I always recommend tryhard free-for-all as the best place to practice getting used to that pressure, but ultimately, the window of time when you will have the best chance of winning a matchup is often when an enemy already thinks the matchup is won in their favor. The next character that we got to talk about is Kiriko. Now, the biggest mistake that I'm seeing Kirikos make is they teleport to an ally to bail them out when it's not realistic that you could save them. Well, yes, you can make them immortal and you can bail them out of a lot of situations. If you teleport to an enemy only for them to get ulted or be targeted by multiple enemies at the same time, they might just kill you both when you didn't actually need to die at all. So be hyper careful about who you try to save and when, and try to be very aware of what's going on the battlefield. The next character that we got to talk about is Junkrat Queen. Now, the thing that you want to be doing a lot on Junkrat Queen is just fish for value pools that are going to bait out a lot of cooldowns and generate you potential picks. And you can easily pull into a carnage and even throw the knife after you jiggle from cover, pull in, start your carnage, and swing as you peek out of the corner, so you're not really submitting yourself to a lot of fire from the enemy. And then pick your battles in general and don't commit to too much. Junker Queen's really strong, but if she gets isolated and targeted by a lot of people, she's easy prey. The next character that we got to talk about is none other than Junkrat. Now, what you need to be careful of on Junkrat is using both your mines when you might need one for mobility. I think sandbagging a mine for mobility is very important, especially up against compositions that have someone that can push onto you and you need to get out safely. On top of that, up against hit scan and projectile characters like Hanzo, you need to be careful about traveling through open space. Instead of mining just straight in an arced pattern, a really good Hanzo or McCree player will kill you every single time, so be hyper careful of that. Next up, we got to talk about Lucio. And one of the biggest mistakes a lot of Lucio players make is they heal too much. And I know that healing is part of the job of supports, but it is important to understand that speed boost is one of the most powerful abilities in the entire game of Overwatch, because being able to transverse through open space faster means you can deal damage quicker, get out of danger quicker, and it effectively becomes healing in a lot of situations, and oftentimes it becomes just more efficient actions by your team. So be careful about amping up your heal. Most of the time you're not going to need to do it all that much, if at all, and if you do, you can always do a split amp up where you do half speed, half heal. The next character that we got to talk about is Mei, and Mei's most powerful abilities is undoubtedly her wall. It's really important that you note key choke points on the map that you can block enemies in and focus them down. Not every situation is going to work properly for your wall, but if you can slowly learn the appropriate choke points, you will get some free kills and a lot of value. In addition, a lot of Mei players like to just go into your ice block and heal up fully, but most of the time it is better to use ice block as a dodge or a fade, where if an enemy comes after you and tries to kill you, you tap into it very quickly, tap out, and then kill them instead. You're using it as a temporarily invulnerability and not waiting the entire time to get full healed, only for the enemy to wait with you and then focus you when your ice block ends. Next up, we got to talk about Mercy, and one of the biggest mistakes that new Mercy players make is dying mid-res. Make sure that you really evaluate whether or not you could get a res off in the first place, because a lot of enemies will kill a target, loop back around, and wait for you if you are Mercy or you have Mercy on your team. Now, there is always a risk to reward here, where if you're gonna lose the team fight if you don't get the res off, then it might be worth sticking the res and trying to get it off, even if you might die in the process, because you either res the person and have a chance to win a losing team fight, or you go back to spawn and you get to regroup with your team. And then the other tip I have on Mercy is don't be a heal bot. Remember, Mercy is not just for healing. Damage boosting is one of the best ways to get a ton of impact and value by changing the breakpoints on a ton of DPS characters. The next character that we got to talk about is Moira, and one of the biggest mistakes that players make on Moira, no matter how long you've played the game, is you waste your entire heal bar and then you don't have healing when you need it. Remember, one tap will do a total of 140 healing, because one tap will do 70 over time and then 70 more after 1 second throughout the process. So you'll do 140 with very little amounts, and you really only need to give people little pumps. You don't need to just spray it all out until they're full HP, because it will heal them over time. On top of that, it's far more efficient if you're being dove by a target to heal orb yourself and duel them rather than try to use your damage orb to duel them. A lot of players do this and they end up getting killed, when if they just become super hard to kill, they will kill the enemy over time. Next up, we got to talk about Orisa, and it's very important that you're properly playing cover with Orisa. You don't have a shield like you used to, and it's also important that you time your engagements in open space and pushing and taking space based off your abilities. Specifically, your spinny thingy and your fortify are abilities that you're going to want to have if you ever challenge or fight for open space. And then when you don't have it, you're going to want to back up, play near natural cover, and wait to truly engage until you have those abilities again. Next up, we got to talk about Pharah. Now, a Pharah wants to position most of the time incredibly far away from the effective range of the majority of hit scans in the game and spam from a distance because their rockets do not have any fall off damage, so you can just spam choke points and objectives and slowly build up ultimates. When you see a huge advantage and you did a lot of damage, you could swoop in and try to get some definitive kills. That being said, your position definitely has to change if you're up against a Widowmaker, because just like you, she has no fall off damage and she will dink you. So in that situation, you're going to want to use cover and go from rooftop to rooftop and navigate towards the Widow and then dive bomb her with your concussive blast, only to quickly kill her and fly away. And then you could engage into a long distance spam until you find that opportunity. But if the enemy team was relying only on the Widowmaker to deal with you, you will have free reign if you manage to dive bomb her and kill her. But it requires the time in which you peek the enemy and the time at which you're actually fighting the enemy to be almost simultaneous, because you don't want to give the enemy very many opportunities to pick you off. Next off, we got to talk about Reaper, and in a similar way to Mei, but even more powerful, Reaper's Fade should be used primarily as a dodge ability or an ability dodge, not just for running away. A great example of this is shooting a hog like 3 times, and as he goes to hook you, you fade out, dodge it, fade back in, and finish the Roadhog off. While you definitely can use Reaper's Fade to get away, and you should do that a number of different times, there's many examples where you could use Fade to just get kills, and with your lifesteal, you're going to be able to stabilize after getting that kill, and enemies that use one ability trying to kill you only to barely miss and not kill you because of your Fade means that you're probably going to win that matchup. On top of that, if you're ever going to try to ult, you need to actually track enemy crowd control abilities, because if you get hooked or stunned in some way when you pop your ultimate, you're not going to get any value. But if you look for those things, wait for them to be used, and then go in, your success rate with your ultimate is going to skyrocket. Next up on the list, we have Reinhardt. Now, you're going to want to make sure that you're not just pushing forward with the shield up all the time, because by the time you get to the front line in the combat, you're going to have a broken shield. It is really important that you exercise proper shield management by using a combination of natural cover and just your actual body life that will get healed up to take and push up on space. And then when you have ground, you can use your shield to allow your DPS players and your supports to deal more damage from behind you safely with that form of artificial cover. On top of that, you're going to want to try to get as many swings as you can safely, jiggling in and around natural cover to swing as much as possible, build up that ultimate, and try and get sizable shatters. Next up, we do got to talk about Roadhog. And the biggest threat to a Roadhog that you need to be very careful of is Ana. Ana has all the abilities to shut you down, can anti-nade you, and on top of that, she can sleep you. So you got to be very careful there. And with the addition of 2 Bubble Zarya and Kiriko and a number of different characters that can shut down your hook, you got to be very careful about getting too greedy with hooks that may or may not actually end up in a kill, because there's so many bail abilities for your hook. If you go all in on a hook that lands only for it to get denied, you're just gonna feed and die over and over again. So it's a good idea to keep many of these abilities in mind and always be near natural cover so you have a get out of jail free card if things go awry. Next up, we do got to talk about Sigma, and one of the most important things with Sigma is just to properly cycle your abilities and shield management. Sigma is an attrition-based character that wants to slowly whittle down the enemy over time, put extra pressure on them, and eventually build up his ultimate as well. And you need to be cycling your shield, never letting it break, but still getting substantial value from it, and your kinetic grasp, making sure that you also utilize rock to slow enemies' progression. If you're up against something like a Ryan, for instance, you can't allow him to take ground for free, but you don't want to meet him. If you touch him, if you get close enough for him to swing on you, you're just a dog in that matchup. And there's a lot of characters like that, like Zarya, like Roadhog, even Junkrat Queen. You don't want to get up close and personal to these characters. You want to maintain that proper distance so you can slowly whittle their resources down and poke them down, and then build up your ultimate as well from a safe place. Next up, we got to talk about Sojourn, and it's very interesting because just like Ana, Sojourn is a combination of projectile and hit scan fire, where her primary is projectile and her alternate fire is hit scan. Now, be very careful about how much you commit when you're playing Sojourn. She has one form of mobility, and unlike a lot of these other characters that can be used to push aggressively, most of them have some sort of return ability like Tracer's Recall or protectability like Genji's Deflect. So it's not quite the same. If you over-engage, you're not going to have it out. On top of that, utilize the high ground because you can easily run away from a target by jumping to the low ground and then sliding back to the high ground. You have a lot of variation there, and it's easier to deal damage from the high ground as well. Next up, we got to talk about Soldier 76, and the best tip that I can give you for Soldier is that it's really easy to still hit your shots and have really difficult to hit movement. If you ever go up against a very good Soldier player, you'll know right away because they move completely different. They play on the high ground and they bob and weave. They rock almost. That really alters their hitbox because if you bob about 3 steps to the left and crouch, stand up, go 3 steps to the right and crouch, your head hitbox moves in such a bizarre way. It is so damn hard to hit you, and they could be peppering you the entire time while they're doing it. I would highly suggest going into Workshop and seeing a third-person view of yourself and practice your movement on this character, because if you master movement, you're going to be a very difficult to deal with threat. The next character that we got to talk about is none other than Sombra. Sombra always wants to play the high ground because it's easiest for her to get hacks off and deal damage, but one of the biggest mistakes that Sombra players make is they put their translocate way too far away. You don't want to just go back to health packs over and over again. Oftentimes, you just want to go back to your team and get healed and make sure that you're not teleporting way out of the fight because your team really needs you and you can't just be out of the fight over and over again throughout the course of the game. The next character that we need to talk about is Symmetra. Now, Symmetra can play in a number of different ways. There's Symmetras that get pretty tricky and teleport in and try to make a flank play. But the majority of the time, you're going to want to play connected towards your tank, slowly and surely building up your beam and spamming your orbs at choke points, trying to get potential pickoffs. One of the things about Symmetra is that because her beam charges, the longer you stay in the fight, your impact becomes exponential. And it's really important that you try not to get picked off. You're a pretty easy target with low amounts of mobility in combat. So it's really important for you to try to be that slow, grinding force that doesn't try to make a big play until the fight has progressed and your beam has charged up. The next character that we got to talk about is Torb. Now, of course, you can use your turret for anti-flank, but one of the big mistakes that Torb players make is they try to use the shotgun alternate fire when enemies are all up on them, when the majority of the time, using that primary fire is actually more effective. Now, that being said, if enemies are very low and you can just finish them off with ease, sure, use that alternate fire, but learning how to properly use Torbjorn's primary fire and hit projectiles, even in the head at close range, is one of the best ways to truly win 1v1 after 1v1. The next character that we got to talk about is none other than Tracer, and the most important thing that you need to master on Tracer is blink management and timing of your engagements. So a lot of Tracers will use multiple blinks to get close to a target and then fight an enemy with like 1 blink or no blinks remaining, and they're gonna either die or be forced to recall way the hell away. You really want to start shooting at the target you're trying to kill when you have the maximum amount of resources, 2 or 3 blinks, so that you can utilize as many blinks as you need and your recall and get the value and still get away safely. On top of that, your timing of engagements matter. If the enemy is all grouped up, they're not fighting your team, and you start to engage someone, all of them are going to look at you and you're going to either do nothing or die. You really want to time your engagements and be ready to engage when your team comes in so they're distracted and they have to deal with your teammates as well. You're using the teammates' pressure in order to help you better execute your engagements with all your abilities, and that's how you're going to get the most amount of value on Tracer. The next character that we got to talk about is none other than Widowmaker. And if you play Widowmaker, look for enemies that jump, especially players that are not very advanced at the game will jump a lot, and that's the static movement that is the easiest for you to kill. And in general, positioning is one of the most important things outside of aim that you need to master on Widowmaker, especially when you're up against divers. You need to be careful about aggressively grappling and be cognizant of where they are and where they aren't. If you haven't seen a Genji for like a good amount of time, but you know he's not dead, then you need to be very, very careful and aware. That guy is sneaking up on you, but if you can spot it out, if you can be prepared for it and get a body shot on him in advance as he tries to approach you, you can grapple away and finish him off, and you still have a very good chance of winning that duel. The next character that we have for you is Winston. And one of the things that you need to do, especially if you're up against an enemy team that has a lot of crowd control, or it's very hard for you to dive into them because you don't have dive backup, like you don't have divers on your team, is jump onto enemies, but don't leap onto them. Don't use any of your abilities. You just literally fall down on them, start dealing damage, put your bubble and play in and out of your bubble, and then you have your leap to run away. And then you do that enough to create space and eventually build up your ultimate, and then you can full commit. If you just jump in against enemies without backup, you're gonna just die a majority of the time. And it's far better to make sure that you have a way to get out and still create space and generate ult charge for plays later down the line. The next character that we got to talk about is Wrecking Ball. And one of the things you have to master on Wrecking Ball is the routing and the megas on the map, because Wrecking Balls will often not get healed. They'll need to find their own healing as they roll around the map and try to be self-sufficient. Also, you need to be very cognizant of crowd control and Sombra, because these are the characters that can really stop your engagement. Be careful of them and make sure that you're not engaging onto multiple forms of CC without substantial health and your abilities, or else it's way too easy for enemies to kill you. Next up, we do have to talk about Zarya, and Zarya's want to engage based on their cooldowns. At the very beginning of an engagement, you can use both your bubbles aggressively to build up that charge, and then you maintain it over time, trying to only use one bubble to continuously push forward and maintain your charge, while saving another bubble to either push forward yourself to burst down some kills, or to bail a teammate out of danger. The last character that we got to talk about is none other than Zenyatta. And on Zenyatta, positioning is God. You are a glass cannon, and it's very important that you position in a way that is cognizant of where divers could come from. You need to be aware of where they're going, where they're routing, where were they last seen, and appropriately either play with your team or play in a hard-to-get spot so that it's very difficult for enemies to dive you, and they're not just going to appear on you all at once. Also, there's a lot of situations on Zenyatta where the only way to actually live is by winning the duel, but with Zenyatta's super kick, his passive healing, and his ability to completely outplay DPS characters if you're a mechanical god, Zenyatta has all the tools to do so. So combining your positioning with advanced mechanics means that you can just frag out and even win against divers again and again. Now, this is one tip for every single hero in the entire game. I know some of these were pretty surface level, but it's just one tip, and I can do advanced guides over any of these characters. You just gotta let me know exactly what character you want to see and why, and I'll be sure to get right on it. Please smash the like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video or received any valuable information from it. I thank you so much for coming by, and I'll see you next time.